Hello, my name is Jonathan Curtis, and welcome to this video as part of the Rudimental Drummer series. In this video, I'm going to be exploring a pair of lesser known but illustrious rudiments called the drag tap and the double drag tap, sometimes called the drag stroke and the double drag stroke. I may use those terms interchangeably throughout this video. The drag tap and the double drag tap appear as part of the standard 40 rudiments as published by the Percussive Art Society. Beyond that, they appear as part of the first 13 essential rudiments in 1933 as published and standardized by Nard. Now, this is very significant because this suggests that this pair of rudiments were so foundational that they were considered important enough to be in the first list of 13 essential rudiments as published. This means they have some function. They are useful. The snare drum has existed in some form for perhaps 700 years, depending on when we define the snare drum and how strict we are with that definition. Nevertheless, over the centuries, the vocabulary of this instrument has developed, it has evolved, new ideas have been introduced, and importantly, old ideas have been discarded. This means that today we are left with hundreds of years worth of development, leaving us with vocabulary that is one thing: functional. It served some purpose. So it behoves us as practitioners of this art form to understand what that purpose is, what those functions were, to help us understand why they are still here today, because fundamentally the rudiments form the fundamental concepts that define how we play the snare drum. Now, the drag tap and the double drag tap in their form as they exist today are very, very simple, deceptively so. When we explore them on the Percussive Art Society list, they appear as follows. The drag tap, very simply, is a drag on one hand, followed by a tap on the other. If we repeat this, we get a simple phrase like that. Very simple, not much trouble. The double drag tap simply adds a second drag for each phrase. Drag, drag, tap, drag, drag, tap. Now, this simplicity often means that they are ignored. Many students look at these and go, okay, so what? Why has that even got a name? It seems so simple and so arbitrary that I'm not really going to give it any more thought. And I can totally understand this approach because there isn't enough information there is no context to explain why this is still here today, and certainly why this is considered fundamental to our vocabulary. In front of me down here on the music stand, just out of shot, I have copies of two very important beatings from France called La Diane and Le Rigidon. I know you'll have to excuse my French pronunciation here. La Diane, Le Rigidon. Now, both of these are historic reveille. A reveille is a signalling on the drums that serve to wake up a camp while on campaign. So imagine an army in the field, on campaign, on exercises, going to battle, whatever the situation may be, and all of the camp soldiers and personnel are in bed. It was the drummer's job in the morning to play a reveille to wake up the camp. It was often short, sharp, loud, and recognizable. For obvious purposes, it was essentially an alarm clock. Now, La Diane and La Rigidon are two very old, very important French reveille. Le Rigidon, especially, has a very distinct phrase that is reminiscent of a reveille that we still have today in the Anglophonic world. Here is the opening line from Le Rigidon. And here is the opening line from the Three Camps. Both of those are obviously very similar, and the parallels there are apparent. The Three Camps is slightly more recent than Le Rigidon, so it is generally accepted that the Three Camps as an American reveille, as part of the American tradition, is simply an adaptation, an adoption of Le Rigidon from the original French pattern and applied to the modern American tradition. Three Camps itself is quite historic, dating back to a few hundred years, but nevertheless, its roots in the French rigidon are clear. Now, as I play those patterns there, the relationship to the drag stroke is not clear. Let me show you le rigidon again and slow it right down. Here is the opening 2 bars. And here is the opening bar on repeat. Now it's the second beat of that first bar that we are interested in. On its own, it sounds like this. Now in isolation, that particular pattern has a name. It is called coup de la rigidon, the rigidon stroke. It literally has a name, a stroke named after it, the rigidon stroke. If I take that rigidon stroke and start to stretch it out, we will start to see how it can collapse down into the modern drag tap. Now, there's 2 very important points of distinction there. The first is that the drag in le rigidon, the rigidon stroke, is very, very open. It is an open drag. And secondly, that the time signature is different. We are clearly in 6/8 here, groups of 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Nevertheless, this coup de la rigidon, this rigidon stroke, is the direct precursor to today's drag tap. It is unclear why the modern drag tap is shown essentially in 2/4. Because there's no instance of it being used that way in the historical repertoire. It has no precedent in that form. So it's one of those strange instances where something has been taken from its original form and presented in a slightly unusual way. And when you look at the history of many of the 40 standard rudiments, that's actually quite common. You look at it on the Percussive Art Society list and go, why is it like that when it was originally in this form? Nevertheless, that is a rabbit hole in and of itself. The point is that the drag stroke as it exists today is a direct descendant of that rigidon stroke. Now, the 2 points I noted are important. The first is that the drag has become closed in modern playing, but was originally very open. Now, this is really important because when we see the coup de la rigidon itself, it looks like this. And we can clearly see there the use of closed drag notation in that second phrase. However, when you look at the accompanying performance notes to le rigidon, there is a distinct warning that says, do not play the drags closed. I'm paraphrasing, but it is very, very clear. And it even goes so far as to say many students get this wrong. And if they're in the military, they get into trouble. So many people would play it like this because of the notation. And that is the incorrect feel. In the rigidon, these have to be completely open. So the idea is across the whole line of the rigidon, we have this unbroken double stroke roll punctuated solely by the accents. Entirely reminiscent of the 3 camps. Now, there is another rudiment in the French repertoire called ras de trois, literally the 3-stroke roll. And the 3-stroke roll is one part of the drag stroke. A ras de trois is essentially an open drag on its own. Where today we would play a single drag very closed, the ras de trois is very open. And we can see again the direct parallels between the ras de trois, the 3-stroke roll, and today's drag tap. As I say, it is very unclear why the drag tap is presented in this form when originally it was very open and in 6/8. But its primary function here is to serve as a short three-stroke roll to accent certain notes as part of an extended roll. This is very common in French marching generally, but we have this unbroken double-stroke roll that is punctuated by accents. And you can hear there those short dat da dat 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 dat. Those are the three-stroke rolls, the redotoire, but they are the early form of what is today illustrated in the drag tap. Now, again, strangely, in the Percussive Art Society 40 standard rudiments, there is no three-stroke roll. The smallest measured roll in the American tradition, in the Anglophonic world, is the five-stroke roll. Yet the French absolutely recognize a three-stroke roll, and it seems to be interchangeable with the coup de la rigidon. It seems to be interchangeable with the three-stroke roll, with the drag stroke, the drag tap. Now, this seems to be so common that the rigidon stroke is essentially a specific and famous historical example of the redotoire. The redotoire, the three-stroke roll, has been around for a very long time, and it seems that its inclusion in le rigidon, this very famous camp beating, warranted giving it its own name. So the coup de la rigidon, the rigidon stroke, is a three-stroke roll in a very specific historic context. And that is today passed down to us with a little bit of change, a little bit of molding, as the drag stroke or the drag tap. Now, the double drag tap is even more interesting because we have a completely different time signature here. The way it is shown in its typical form on the Percussive Art Society list is in 6/8. Which is what we would expect the drag tap to be shown in. In 6/8, the double drag tap is a group of three. 1, 2, 3, drag, drag, tap, drag, drag, tap. And it does retain this form. I'm going to come on to some more contemporary usage in a moment. It does retain that triplet form. However, in its original form, which is from la diane, which is kind of the sister of le rigidon, another one of these early French reveille, it's not a triplet at all. It's a quintuplet. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's on a 5-note grid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And this is a really interesting change, and it's certainly something that has been lost, perhaps as it crossed the Atlantic and went to the colonies. Nevertheless, the original usage, the early usage of this diane stroke, this double drag tap, is in a quintuple grid that sounds like this. But again, played open. So the second line here of La Diane gives us a very stark marching phrase. Marching, I'll come on to that in a moment. I'm going to qualify that. It's a marching phrase, but in this instance used as a reveille. Here's the second line of La Diane, using these coups de La Diane, these Diane strokes, the double drag taps. Now, there's no surprise that that was used as a reveille. I think that would wake anybody up in the morning, and I would suggest it would be quite a shocking way to wake up as well. Now, I said a moment ago that this is a very reminiscent of a marching phrase. In the Basel style of Swiss drumming, the quintuplet subdivision is often used as the basic form of a march. So there is strong reason to believe that the La Diane itself, the early French reveille, is actually part of an early adaptation, an earlier adoption of a Swiss march from the Basel style. The Basel style has this tendency to adopt a quintuple swing. It's like the Swiss version of a swing. In American jazz playing, swing is felt as a triplet. In Basel drumming, swing is stretched out into something more like a quintuplet. It's very difficult to quantify, but it's certainly closer to a group of 5 than a group of 3. Nevertheless, in the same way as the rigidon stroke, we see these two back-to-back examples of a 3-stroke roll, another use of this French redotoire. You can hear again this unbroken roll, but this time on a quintuple grid. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now, in the original transcription, at least as it survives today, of La Diane, you can see very clearly the double drag taps as they appear. They look like this. Once again, they are using the grace notes to indicate what would suggest a closed drag. But again, there is distinct warning in the accompanying performance notes not to treat it as such. This is the same instance, the same context, the same idea as the rigidon. This is to be treated as an unbroken double stroke roll, punctuated only by the accents. Now, I said that it has retained its triplet feel as it has crossed the pond and gone over to America and found its way into the common American vocabulary. Also on my music stand here, I have a very particular favourite of mine, a piece by John Pratt called Ginger Snap, which represents the triplet variation of this. Again, it is unclear precisely why the original quintuple feel has been replaced by a triplet feel. Nevertheless, we find a triplet variation of these ideas as far back as Will Coxon in the 1940s. Certainly here with John Pratt in 1959, we find instances of the double drag stroke. So I'm going to play the first bar from the top line of the second page of Ginger Snap from his 14 Modern Contest Solos, published in 1959. It sounds like this, and we will hear something very, very familiar. That is a very distinct parallel to the phrase from La Diane. It's almost identical, except it's been kind of manipulated into this triplet form. So in Pratt, it looks like this, whereas in La Diane, it looked like this. And you can see they are very, very distinct, and they feel almost identical to play, because you've got this very subtle distinction between the groups of 3 and the groups of 5 that at speed are almost going to get lost. They're almost going to blur together. Now, in the modern rendition, the double drag stroke as it appears here in Pratt is open to interpretation. Again, it is written using grace notes, so it would suggest a closed interpretation of those drags. Whereas in La Diane, they are written very open. They are expected to be played very open. So there is a suggestion, there is a point of view that suggests that Ginger Snap should be played in the same way. I would suggest at this stage, there is no way to fully answer that. We can't ask Pratt himself, unfortunately, and it is open to interpretation. I would suggest, in my own opinion, by the 1960s, drags had a tendency to close together, but the notation, even by this era, was still open to interpretation itself. As with the earlier Will Coxon pieces, it's unclear whether the grace note drag notation did actually indicate a closed drag or essentially a French 3-stroke roll. Nevertheless, both of these examples are really famous in their own way. They have a lot of precedent. They have a lot of illustrious history that is sadly lost to a lot of today's students because they are just simply not presented in this manner. But hopefully you can see there how this drag tap, the double drag tap, have their direct descendants in the double drag stroke and the drag stroke, le coup de la rigidon, the coup de la Diane. They have frequent application in the early Nard solos, frequent application in Will Coxon, famous application here in Ginger Snap through Pratt, especially the double drag variation, the double drag tap. But they both have their origins in the French 3-stroke roll and their application into very famous French reveille. So if you have been interested in this discussion, I would encourage you to explore the Rudimental Drummer. It is full of this sort of information. It is a complete treatise on the concept of rudimental drumming itself and examines many of the rudiments in this manner. It is available now physically worldwide, digitally, and on Kindle. So please feel free to explore that at your leisure. If you've enjoyed this content, you can find more of me at jonathancurtis.co.uk, find my publications, my compositions, my performances, or my drum tuition as well. I look forward to hearing from you, even if it's just to stop by and say hello. So thank you very much. Good luck in your own drumming, and I'll see you next time.